The Appalachian Mountains, ancient, brooding, they hold secrets. Deep within their folds lies Holler Creek General Hospital. By day it's a place of healing, a beacon of hope against the rugged landscape, but when night descends, a different energy takes hold. The fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit cast long dancing shadows. They writhe and twist, mimicking unseen forms. This is the ICU after midnight, a place where life and death hang in a delicate, terrifying balance. The air itself feels heavy, thick with unspoken fears, with the lingering echoes of pain and desperation. Every beep of a monitor, every sigh of a ventilator, seems amplified, magnified by the oppressive silence of the sleeping world outside. The night shift nurses know this feeling. They walk these halls like sentinels, guardians against the encroaching darkness. But sometimes the darkness pushes back. It seeps through the cracks. It whispers in the quiet corners. The ICU becomes a different realm. A place where the veil between worlds feels dangerously thin. The sterile environment, meant to fight off infection and decay, cannot always keep out what lurks beyond our understanding. These nurses, they are brave. They face human suffering head-on. But some things they encounter here are not of this world. They are something else, something ancient and chilling, something that calls this Appalachian Valley home. This is their reality. Sarah was an ICU nurse, compassionate, dedicated. She had a gentle touch and a kind word for every patient. She'd chosen this path to help people, to make a difference in their most vulnerable moments. She'd worked the night shift at Holler Creek General for 3 years. She was no stranger to the grim realities of critical care. She'd seen death. She'd felt its cold presence. But there was one place in the ICU that filled her with a unique, creeping dread. A specific room that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Every single time she had to enter. Room 9. It was just a room, like any other, or so it should have been. But room 9 felt different. It held a palpable chill, an oppressive energy that seemed to cling to anyone who crossed its threshold. Even when empty, it never truly felt empty.
I would often find myself taking a deep breath before pushing open its door. My heart would beat a little faster. My senses would heighten. I'd try to rationalize it, tell myself it was just the stress of the job, but deep down, I knew.
Room 9. It sat at the end of a less trafficked corridor, slightly isolated, almost forgotten, until it was needed. The equipment inside was standard, a hospital bed, a ventilator, an array of monitors. Yet these familiar objects often took on a sinister quality within its 4 walls. Nurses reported strange malfunctions, lights flickering on and off without cause, call bells ringing when the room was unoccupied. The temperature would drop suddenly, sharply, leaving goosebumps on bare arms even on the warmest Appalachian nights. These were not isolated incidents. They were a pattern, a disturbing tapestry woven from countless unsettling moments. The most common phenomenon was the sound, faint whispers, so soft you'd question if you'd heard them at all. Were they real, or just the mind playing tricks in the dead of night?
Help me, some thought they heard. Others reported a sigh, a mournful, drawn-out exhalation that seemed to emanate from the very walls.
Sarah had heard them, more than once. She'd freeze, her blood running cold. She'd scan the empty room, her flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, finding nothing, no source, no explanation, just the lingering echo of a voice that shouldn't be there. The room seemed to have a consciousness, an awareness, and sometimes it seemed to want to interact. One of the most terrifying and recurring events in room 9 involved the cardiac monitor. This machine, a sentinel of life, would sometimes spring into action, even when the room was empty, or when a patient was present but their own monitor was functioning perfectly beside it. The spare monitor, often left on standby, would suddenly emit a steady rhythmic beep, 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 a perfect sinus rhythm displayed on its screen, as if an invisible patient lay in the bed, connected, alive. Nurses would rush in, their hearts pounding, expecting an emergency or a prank. They found neither. The nurses often spoke in hushed tones about Mr. Halpern. He had been a patient in room 9 several months prior. An elderly man from one of the more isolated mountain communities. He was frail, his body ravaged by a long illness, but his eyes were sharp and filled with a primal fear.
He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words were unsettling. He would stare at the corners of the room, his gaze fixed on something unseen. He'd whisper about shadows, about figures that watched him from the darkness.
The staff tried to reassure him, attributing his fears to delirium, to the medication, to the unfamiliar environment. But Mr. Halpern was adamant.
They're waiting. They don't want me to leave.
He seemed terrified not just of dying, but of awaited him in that room. Sarah had cared for him during his final days. She remembered his fear. It was palpable, contagious.
I tried to comfort him, to bring him some peace. But his terror was too profound, too deeply rooted. He would grip my hand, his fingers surprisingly strong for such a frail man.
Don't let them take me.
He'd plead, his eyes wide with a horror that chilled Sarah to her core. She didn't know who they were, but his fear felt real.
The night Mr. Halpern passed was particularly stormy. Wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the ICU. It felt like the very mountains were angry.
He became agitated, thrashing in his bed, pointing towards the empty doorway.
He's here, the tall one. He's smiling.
Sarah saw nothing, just the dimly lit corridor. One particularly grueling night, Sarah found herself alone, doing late checks. The ICU was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that presses in on you. She was exhausted, running on caffeine and sheer willpower.
As I approached room 9, which was currently unoccupied, I felt the familiar wave of dread wash over me. Stronger this time, colder.
She hesitated at the door, a knot forming in her stomach. She had to check the equipment, ensure everything was ready for a potential new admission. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the standby monitor screens. She moved towards the bed, her flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the shadows.
That's when I saw it. Standing at the foot of the bed, a tall, shadowy figure. Indistinct at first, but as my eyes adjusted, features began to emerge. It was him, Mr. Halpern, or what looked like him. His form was translucent, wavering slightly, but his face was clear, etched with the same terror I remembered from his final moments. His eyes were wide, staring directly at me, accusingly, pleadingly.
Sarah froze, her breath caught in her throat, her heart hammered against her ribs. This was no trick of the light, no product of an overtired mind. This was real.
Mr. Halpern?
She whispered, her voice barely audible. The air in the room dropped several degrees. Sarah collapsed into a chair at the nurse's station, trembling uncontrollably. James, the older, more experienced nurse, was immediately by her side.
Sarah? What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost.
His attempt at levity died on his lips when he saw the genuine terror in her eyes. She could barely speak, her words tumbling out in a choked, fragmented stream.
Room 9, Mr. Halpern, I saw him. He was there.
She buried her face in her hands. The image of the spectral figure burned into her mind. She expected disbelief, skepticism, perhaps even a gentle suggestion that she was overworked, needed rest. Instead, James pulled up a chair and sat beside her. His expression was serious, somber. He waited patiently for her to compose herself. When she finally looked up, he nodded slowly.
I believe you, Sarah. You're not the first one to see him, or something like him, in that room.
Sarah stared at him, stunned.
You've seen things too?
James sighed, a weary sound that spoke of long nights and unexplained phenomena.
Seen things, heard things, felt things. Room 9, it's got a history, a dark one. Longer than any of us have been working here, I reckon.
James then began to recount his own experiences, and those of other nurses, stories he'd mostly kept to himself, or shared only with a trusted few. The encounter with Mr. Halpern's apparition left an indelible mark on Sarah. Sleep became a battlefield. Every shadow in her bedroom seemed to morph into his gaunt, terrified face. The silence of her apartment was filled with imagined whispers. The beep of her microwave sounded like the phantom cardiac monitor from room 9. The psychological toll was immense. She found herself jumpy, anxious, constantly looking over her shoulder. The sterile, controlled environment of the ICU, once a place of professional purpose, now felt like a hunting ground, where the unseen preyed on the vulnerable, and on those who dared to witness its presence. She wasn't the only one. Many nurses who had prolonged exposure to room 9, or who had experienced something particularly unsettling, carried similar scars. Some developed a persistent nervousness, others became withdrawn, a few requested transfers to different units, or left Holler Creek General altogether, unable to cope with the constant low-level dread, the fear of what they might encounter next. The hospital administration, when rumors reached them, officially dismissed such claims as products of stress and overactive imaginations. There were no official reports, no investigations, just the quiet, shared knowledge among the night staff, a silent acknowledgement of the darkness that resided in Room 9. The haunting of Room 9 became an undeniable part of the lore at Holler Creek General, a chilling chapter in its history, passed down in hushed tones from veteran nurses to wary newcomers. It wasn't just a collection of ghost stories, it was a testament to the profound impact of intense human experience, of life, death, and the turbulent emotions that accompany them. The ICU, a place of such concentrated suffering and struggle, seemed to act as a conduit, a focal point for energies that could not or would not move on, restless spirits forever tethered to the place of their final moments, or perhaps to the fear that consumed them. What truly resides in Room 9? Is it the tormented spirit of Mr. Halprin, still trapped by his terror, or is it something older, something more intrinsically tied to the ancient Appalachian land upon which the hospital was built? Perhaps it's a confluence of many spirits, many residual energies, a chorus of whispers from those who passed within its walls. The questions remain unanswered, defying logical explanation, defying scientific scrutiny. But for the nurses who have witnessed its chilling manifestations, the reality of the haunting is undeniable. It is a truth felt deep in their bones, a cold, hard certainty in the dead of night. The impact on the staff was profound. It fostered a strange bond among those who had shared the experience, a silent understanding. But it also created a lingering sense of unease, a constant awareness that they were not always alone in those quiet, sterile halls.